also known as Dr. V here at the U. I use she, her, they, them pronouns, and I am delighted to be here with you today with this amazing panel for an extremely important discussion we're about to have. Wanted to share a little bit about what Trans Day of Remembrance, or TDOR, is. It is an International Transgender Day of Remembrance and has been observed on November 20th since 1999. It was the very first vigil was held to commemorate Rita Hester, who was a trans woman of color who was killed in 1998. Today, the day honors the memory of our transgender family members whose lives have been lost in senseless acts of anti-transgender violence. For those of you on campus who are hosting, we're hosting our UM Trans Day of Remembrance downstairs just outside the Whitman University Center. It's a memorial until 3 p.m. So if you happen to be on campus, please stop by. Additionally, the week that TDOR falls on is known as Trans Awareness Week, when people and organizations around the country participate to help raise visibility for transgender people and address the issues that our community faces. There are a number of events and activities happening all around us in our community. For more information on these events, you can visit our social media sites, GLAD websites, and also several of our community agencies. We are delighted to host this very impressive panel of trans leaders in our community. Vanessa is going to share a little bit more about our panel in just a minute. But before I turn it over to her, I want to take a minute to introduce our student moderator for today. Jane Perlman is a graduating senior this semester who is receiving her bachelor's in urban studies and geography with a minor in ecosystem science and policy. Jane has worked tirelessly on our campus and in the community for the rights of the LGBTQ community, and she is one of our most engaged trans leaders on campus. I've had the pleasure of working with Jane over the past 3 years on important issues on campus, including gender inclusive restrooms and serving on our Recreation Centers Committee to assist and advise in the renovation of our rec center's locker rooms that will include gender inclusive spaces. She has served as one of our student assistants at the LGBTQ Center, our constant volunteer, has been a Spectrum Senator in student government, and is passionate about issues of justice, both environmentally and with human rights. I also want to wish Jane a very happy belated birthday, and all that she has the best in everything that comes to her this year as she begins this new chapter of her life after graduation. Jane, I appreciate you, love you, and I thank you for agreeing to be our mentor, our moderator for today. So I'll turn it over to Vanessa.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vega.
Hi, I'm so sorry. I had a phone call. Okay, so I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our 4 amazing panelists today. So without further ado, our first panelist is Aiden Scott, and Aiden obtained his bachelor's degree from the University of Lynchburg in Virginia in communication studies and completed his master's of science in higher education administration at Florida International University. During graduate school, Aiden worked with the Multicultural Programs and Services LGBTQIA Initiatives Office, as well as the Women's Center. Following graduate school, he became a first-year advisor and resident director at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, where he worked for 5 years. Aiden then spent a year working in student conduct at Old Dominion University in Virginia before making a career change. Aiden currently works for the Suffolk Public Library as a library services coordinator in community learning. Outside of work, Aiden identifies as a trans-masculine, gray asexual, pan-romantic, a nerd, a husband, and parent to a sassy bunny and a mischievous kitten. Our second panelist is the amazing Ayana, who is an open, trans-identified female of color who lovingly shares her story of courage, transformation, and change to inform and bring awareness to the general population. Ayana's chairwoman's appointment to the LGBTQ Advisory Board is historic, as she is the first transgender person to be appointed by a city commissioner to sit on a Miami-Dade County board. Also, Ayana is the first transgender person to hold the position of chair to any advisory board within the state of Florida. Ayana is a Barry University School of Social Work grad student and community advocate through the Center for Human Rights and Social Justice. Ayana's mission is to bring awareness and education on the empowerment of intrapersonal communication and self-worth through the eradication of self-insufficiency and unworthiness by way of mindfulness-based practices and narrative therapy techniques and tools. Our third panelist is Elijah Vives. Elijah identifies as a queer transgender man and is currently an FIU graduate student studying clinical mental health counseling. Elijah has done some community work in South Florida with wonderful local organizations such as Safe Schools of South Florida and the Yes Institute, and additionally has taken part in several speaking engagements, educating people such as teachers, counselors, medical professionals, and families on the topics of gender and sexual orientation. Elijah's mission is to empower youth to live and speak their truth. And last but most certainly not least, we have Nicole Parker. Nicole is a transgender woman of Black, Puerto Rican, and Italian descent. She was born and raised in Orlando, Florida, at the age of 19, left her job and home to begin her transition. Nicole's passion is advocating for the rights and dignity of the transgender and gender nonconforming community. Nicole is currently with the One Pulse Foundation as the Director of Stakeholder and Community Relations, and she also works for Equality Florida's Transaction Program as a project coordinator. Additionally, Nicole is the co-founder and director of operations for the Gender Advancement Project. She has sat on various nonprofit boards within the community, including the LGBT Center Board of Directors, the Orlando United Assistance Center Advisory Board, Transaction Advisory Council, and many more. In addition to her work with the One Pulse Foundation, Nicole co-leads the work of the Orlando Trans Collective, which is a collaborative group of transgender and gender nonconforming leaders of color who focus on community building and advocacy efforts for the Central Florida transgender community. Over the past few years, Nicole has been honored with multiple awards for her ongoing advocacy. Without further ado, I will now turn it over to Jane to start our panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. So as we are recognizing today TDOR, Trans Day of Remembrance, I would like to start off by opening up the floor and asking, what does TDOR mean to our panelists?
Yeah, I think for me, TDOR is so important because, as we know, mainstream society tends to not see us trans folks. You know, when it comes to the murders of our family, the worst thing is that you see it on the news and then it disappears, or it's only being talked about in the community and it's not being noticed worldwide. And if it was any other group of people, there would be outrage, there would be protests, there would be all of these things. But because we're trans, a lot of the times we see ourselves as erased from mainstream society. And as usual, you know, trans folks are always at the forefront of fighting for the rights of anybody. But when it comes to us, we kind of look around and nobody's there. So once again, as a community, we had to come together to create a day where we honor those individuals, because our family isn't just being murdered, they are being eyes gouged out, set on fire, stabbed. All of these horrific, all of this anger is being taken out on us. And once again, it's not being seen. So TDOR, while it hurts my heart every year, and especially this year being the deadliest on record, we as a community always want to come together to ensure that we remember those individuals and that they aren't, you know, we haven't lost them in vain, and that we continue to say their names and we continue to fight for their rights and everybody's rights, so that hopefully one day we don't have to hold this.
Similar, for me, the reason it's important is it's an opportunity to think about the people that we've lost and the people that have helped build up our community and our movement to be able to be where we are and continue to propel us forward. But with my background in communication, I think more importantly, it's an opportunity for us to hold media accountable. Part of the reason why I think it's so important is a lot of times when trans people are killed, they're misgendered, they're not spoken of. They don't put forth the effort to figure out who it was. I was doing some research for a project I was doing for my job, and the number of trans identified people that don't have names that have been killed is heartbreaking. So I think having a day of remembrance allows us to think about those that we've lost, but also have a platform to hold our media and our police accountable.
Right. So, you know, TDOR is kind of just a reminder of the work that still needs to be done, right? We need less loss to suicide. We need less loss to homicide. We need to stop the murder of trans women of color who are not only the backbone of the trans community, but the queer community as a whole. And we really need to remember that. Additionally, it's not really just only about remembering who we've lost. I mean, it's a really important day, but it's also remembering what we want to do moving forward as a community, as a society, to see how valuable trans people can be. And that's what it means to me.
What TDOR means to me is the embracing of these beautiful souls who have moved on, these people who were so courageous and so strong to face life without any masks, being who they are, completely open and vulnerable to a society that is filled with religious, political, and societal norms that want to erase transgender people. So I believe that it is in honoring the sacredness of their lives and a call for everybody to take action, spring into action to eradicate this nonsense.
So especially when TDOR passes, it's at the end of Trans Awareness Week. You know, we've all been doing a lot of activism, and then the week ends with the big kind of TDOR event, and it's a very emotional event. What are measures that you feel you can take to ensure that you are continuing self-care and to continue to empower yourself to move forward in this fight, which is just can be very caustic feeling at times?
So I would say that, you know, trans people live a very unique experience. We stay connected mostly through social media, and we find our community, and we're very strong when we're together. It's also important to know that whether we know it or not, every trans person is equipped with an abundance of resilience, bravery, and strength. And knowing that, it gives me a lot of hope for myself. It gives me hope for myself, for our community, and everything that needs to be done. I mean, as far as self-care, it's just building community, being together, having events like this brings me joy, makes me proud of myself and everyone in our community.
Self-care is such a big word for me, especially as a soon-to-be Master of Social Work, a graduate. Self-care to me implies, what do I do for myself from within? How do I embrace my femininity and love who I am because this is who I am? It has nothing to do with the external for me. It's all about the inner embracing of my soul, of this that chooses to express the way that it does in all of its freedom and unmasked. So this self-care is about educating others and sharing with others, but doing so as long as I am taking care of me and not suffering for the sake of education or putting myself out to be mocked.
I think it's very important to remember that first and foremost, we're human. And I think a lot of the times us as trans people, we take on the burden of being a teacher, whether that's going in spaces and having to explain what our experience is, having to explain the violence that our community faces, the disparities that we have. a lot of the time it becomes so natural for us to do it that we don't realize how much it's taking from us. And if you look at us as like in the same concept as a phone battery, eventually that phone battery is going to die and your personal internal battery is going to get low at some time. So I think it's important to always recognize that. And if you're doing something and you're realizing, wow, I'm tired, or wow, I'm like mentally, exhausted, understand that and sit in that for a second and realize, wait, I'm human. I'm allowed to take a break. I don't have to answer this question if it's going to make me even worse than I am. And I think it's also the biggest thing is to celebrate small wins. A lot of the times the work continues on and on and on, and we'll accomplish this thing and then 40 other things come up. But it's important to always celebrate that one win that you got, because that took us just to the next level. And a lot of us look at the overall picture, and all of us never want to have a TDOR again. And we want everybody to understand our experience. But in reality, it's going to take a really long time for that. So if we're able to accomplish this piece and help this amount of people, sit in that and understand that you did that. You have helped to create change, and like hold on to that. Because I think sometimes we're quick to just compartmentalize it and move on to the next thing. And sometimes you just have to sit in that success sometimes. And that's the best thing that I can do, and just disconnect as well.
I think everybody's kind of touched on it. The biggest thing is finding those small wins. For me, it was giving myself the permission to do the things that I had loved before I started my transition, and letting myself identify like what parts of masculinity I wanted to embrace, and how I wanted to express my masculinity. And I think when I started to come to terms with that, I was really able to take care of myself better, which made me be able to support my community better and the people in my life that I really care about better. And I think it's okay if you notice that something's toxic, that you aren't the educator. It took me a while to realize that too, that I don't have to be the educator if this is going to be toxic, and that it's okay not to out yourself if you're not in a space that's safe, and find other ways to provide that education or to provide the change, without necessarily having to put yourself in a space that's going to be unsafe for you. And I know that I get to say that with a lot of privilege. I am a white presenting, people assume I'm heterosexual. My beard gives me a lot of, like, people don't assume that I'm super young or that I've transitioned. So I understand that with that, I get a lot of privilege in that moment, that I am able to just kind of slowly back out of the room without anybody taking notice. But I think, yeah, just giving yourself permission to do the things you enjoy, or to step away when you need to.
Thank you. And so Aiden and Elijah both mentioned community a lot. And I would like to kind of touch on community a little bit more. So we know today in the world, it's a very fragmented, polarized time. So if you find yourself in a place or in a situation where you don't have that community built around, what are some things we can do to kind of foster those communities for ourselves where we don't see them already?
Yeah, I think it's, we live in a wonderful age of social media, and you're able to find our community all around, whether that's on, Facebook, on Instagram, or anything like that. You can kind of just type in #trans or #trans support groups. Support groups are awesome. If you haven't tried a support group, that is one of the best ways to meet people. And now we're in the age of COVID, where everything's like this and like a big Zoom call, so now the support groups have expanded so much because everybody doesn't have to physically be there every Friday at 5 or whatever the case may be. Now it is a space for everybody, and everybody can kind of come in from different states and stuff. So I want people to understand that our experience sometimes makes us feel really alone, but I promise you're not alone. I promise there's a whole community out here waiting with open arms, waiting to embrace you. You just have to find it. And don't give up if you go to one support group or you're in one chat room or something and it doesn't work out. That's okay. There's multiple, you know what I mean? If you're on campus, there's spaces on campus that you can go. There's support groups that are just virtual, in person, some that do outings, different things like that. So as alone as you may feel, understand that we all have felt that before, but there are people here waiting just to say, welcome on in, let's go do something together. Because the worst thing is that isolation feeling. And on top of COVID and our experience as a whole can make us feel really isolated. But I promise there's no reason to feel that way. There are people out there.
Yeah.
I think one of the things also that we can do to get involved in the community is having the dialogues, bringing who I am into my experience, and using myself as that marketing tool. What better than the person who's having the experience to share about the experience? And as long as, again, as and Aiden said, and everybody's touched on it before, as long as we're taking care of ourselves and we know when to back out and when not to, I think it's important that we do. It doesn't have to be the only topic of conversation that I have, but I do want it to be in the awareness of those people who are around me, so that it's present and it's visible, and as well as calling out when something needs to be calling out, not being afraid to stand up and to say what needs to be said. We don't need to run around hiding from the world. We need to be present to ourselves, and when we're present to ourselves, then we can become present to our world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's really important, reminding yourself and thinking, wow, like, it's okay to just be alive. You're entitled to your privacy. You see more and more now on social media, trans people, trans leaders are really like, listen, like these questions are not okay. And it kind of is like, okay, like now that I see some of these people on social media, they're very influential. I'm like, I don't have to answer every single question that people have to ask. I do these panels and people do ask me, a wide range of questions. But that doesn't mean that in my day-to-day or on my social media or anything like that, like that doesn't mean I have to answer them. And so social media has definitely facilitated a lot of conversations for trans people. And it is almost essential, I feel, to the well-being of trans people, just having access to social media, especially trans people who live in rural areas. So just to kind of circle back to how we integrate with one another, social media for me, especially in under did some research, most people say that social media is their first line of like the first time they heard about being trans, the first time they were able to connect with a trans person, the first time that they were able to find out like, where do I get treatment? And so yeah, integrating with the community online is really important.
Thank you. So while we're talking about a community, I want to go to Nicole for a second. In your work with Trans Equality Florida and Trans Action Florida, what have you found are some steps towards creating a more, creating and facilitating more inclusive environments that you find yourself?
Yeah, I think it's really important. And, a lot of times and I'm sure all of us get this question, allies are like, what can we do? And there's so many things that you can do, but the biggest thing is challenge your friends and your family. We've all been around the anti-trans dialogue. We've all heard it before. And a lot of people just like to write it off like, oh, that's so-and-so. No. Let's change that a bit. Ask so-and-so, why do you think that way? You know what I mean? Have you ever met a trans person? Have you ever heard their experience? Do you understand kind of what they go through? And those dialogues are kind of what changes it, because a lot of times when you can put a face to the story, it becomes real. People will hear a story or see something on the news and it's like, oh, okay, that's unfortunate that it happened. But when they see the face of the individual, when they hear the individual speak it from their own mouth, all of a sudden it becomes real. So my favorite thing is to ask people to challenge, and not just allies, even us as trans folks, if you have that capacity to be able to, because a lot of times, once again, we're the teachers, we do this a lot. Sometimes you just don't want to have the conversation. But if you have the energy to have the conversation and you hear anti-trans dialogue, ask about it. Because listen, everybody should recognize their privilege. And I recognize mine, where I can go into spaces and some people may not know I'm trans. But that doesn't mean that just because I hear somebody talking negatively about a trans person, I'm going to be quiet so I'm not outed. I'm the opposite. We're going to have this conversation, and we're going to talk about it, because I want you to see that trans people come in all shapes and sizes. It's not about passing. I hate the word passing. It's so just putting you in a box and making you feel like you need to be no, you don't need to do anything. You need to live authentically and you need to live happy. And that's the goal of everything. So, I think just at the end of the day, challenging that anti-trans verbiage that you hear really can change people's, whole mindset.
Thank you. I love that. I was also, so we kind of talked about how we are all in, how we all get involved in the community, and how we're left to be the teachers. So I wanted to kind of expand this outside of the trans community for a second. How do we bring in allies from the larger LGBTQ plus community, and allies who we would consider within cis heteronormative society? How do we really bring in those allies and help them, not help them, but facilitate them in a way that they can help us?
Nicole, I think that I'm going to say something that you might think differently about, but I'm going to go ahead and share. I don't believe that I actively go out to look for people who can be allies. I think people are drawn to me because of who I am and how I show up and how I choose to tell my story. It's very different than making it a mission to go out and recruit people. I don't believe that that's what it's about for me. Like I said, and I singled Nicole out, thinking that maybe because you're involved in organizations that I don't know if that's what they actually do. I've heard it done before, but I just believe in being myself and just letting that rise naturally, because it does. It's just the nature of things. You put something out and it comes back at you, and it increases and it unfolds that way. And I trust that. So, that's what I do. I share my story, and, just the awareness, creating the awareness creates so much interest and so much desire for knowledge, because there are a lot of people who want to know, who want to be educated, who want to understand. So I just do that by being me.
So one of the things that I think about when you ask that question was a conversation a few years ago that I got to be a part of with members of the Irate 8 out of Cincinnati, out of the University of Cincinnati. And they talked a lot about their allies kind of being at like different levels. They found people that were, had access to different things, had different interests and passions, that could take on more risk than others. So they talked about, like, they had a VP that was very vocal, very active, very involved, and would like always be at the table and go to bat for them. But then they also had like a director of like a university center that was like fed them, made sure that they went to class, made sure they went to sleep, and focused a lot on like their individual care. So when I think about how we can get our allies within the queer community involved, as well as outside the queer community, I think about where we can find their interest and their passion and help plug them in. Because I am by no means the person that's, I admire Nicole and Ayana and everybody who can be up at the podium and be the voice in the face. I get terrified. Like, this is right here is kind of like, I'm shaking because I'm anxious. That's not who I am. And I know that, but I will feed you every day. I will make sure you eat. I will tell you to go home and take a nap. I will be your advocate and making sure that you take care of yourself, because that's where my strengths are. And if I need to be the person that walks into a room because I know that I can walk into rooms that others can't, I will do that. But at the end of the day, I will be the person sitting with you and telling you like, hey, like, let's color in this coloring book because you need a moment. And so I think when we think about bringing in our allies, we need to make sure that they know that they don't have to be the person at the pulpit. They can be the person that's talking one-on-one with their family or their friend, or they can be the person that like is reminding us to go take a nap. And I think that if we can break down some of those barriers of what advocacy is, I think that that takes away some of the scariness of it and will allow people to be more willing to come with us on this journey. Sorry, I get really passionate about it because it was very exciting. Hearing these young women speak about their experience at the University of Cincinnati, like fired me up about being that person. So if anybody wants to talk more about that, feel free to reach out.
No, Aiden, you hit the nail on the head. Advocacy comes in all different forms, and that's the beauty of it. You know what I mean? It's not one cookie cutter thing. And it's certain people, can go out and talk to people, and certain people are the ones, like you said, making sure that you ate, you slept, and everything like that. And that's the beauty of it. And I hate when people, once again, I don't like to be put in a box, if you haven't noticed. And I think people do that with advocacy too. It's like, this is how you become an advocate. It's like, no, this is how you become an advocate. You pick your lane of advocacy and you go full throttle on it. And that's the beauty of it. And that's how we create change, is everyone working together and using their own unique skills to push that needle forward. So I love what you said. It's so spot on.
Thank you very much. And Elijah, as a current student leader, how are you feeling on allyship and garnering that on a campus, especially as a student, as you're working with your peers?
I would say that there needs to be a little bit more representation. It's kind of interesting because I am in a field where, a lot of this needs to be accepted. We need to talk about these topics, clinical mental health counseling. And I find still a certain degree of discomfort around these topics. And it makes me uncomfortable. So I think it's really just having more representation. I mean, trans people are we need to be in more positions of power. We need to be educators. We are so valuable across every discipline. And I don't always see that representation. Sometimes it can be a little discouraging. I mean, not really, I'm empowered enough, but it can be discouraging because I think that we do need to have that. And I think that in a field like mine, these conversations shouldn't be so uncomfortable anymore. And another thing is mental health counseling services on campus. They also need to become way more competent on these issues. I've heard some wild stories from my queer siblings, and I think they need to be held accountable. I've always thought about how, maybe there needs to be a certain degree of some statistics from these counseling centers, how they're treating trans people and queer people. How are they responding to the therapy that they're getting, and how are the therapists furthering their education on these topics? Because if they're not being held accountable, these students will continue to experience stigmatization on their part, and it's just a very uncomfortable situation. So I think as far as school goes and students, that's what really needs to change, awareness, competence, and just integrating these things into the conversation among classes, because it shouldn't be so uncomfortable.
Thank you very much. So now I'd like to go ahead and open the questions up to the audience. If you'd like to ask a question, you can either type Mike into the chat box and I can go in that order, or you can just type a question into the chat box and I can go ahead and ask it. Brittany, you can go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Sorry that you're looking at my picture. It's been a rough one, so I don't want anybody see what I look like right now. But thank you so much for the panel. I do have a question. Hopefully it's not too long. But I recently attended a session regarding resilience among people of color in general. And I found it really interesting. One of the panelists made a statement saying that basically resilience as a concept is something that he called like oppression 2.0. So basically encouraging marginalized folks to kind of respond in a certain kind of way to systemic oppression instead of like working to uproot that oppression altogether. So basically having this code of conduct amongst marginalized folks about how to act given that oppression instead of, I guess, challenging that altogether. So I'm hoping, I know you all were talking a little bit about having the burden of being teachers. And so I'm hoping this question isn't burdensome, but I would like to hear your thoughts about how cis folks in Miami/South Florida specifically can take on more of the burden of challenging and working to remove those systemic barriers within our local context so that trans folks are not always having to rely on resilience in response to oppression. So ways that we can remove those barriers in the first place so that it's not, resilience isn't a requirement, I guess, of existing.
Okay. I don't believe, Brittany, that there is a clear-cut answer to say this is the way to go. I think it's about feeling the moment and acknowledging the room that you're in and the space and the atmosphere that is there, and moving through it that way. And just being genuine with myself. I keep on going back to that because it's so important to be genuine in everything that I do. And that alone moves a room. That alone can move a room, whether I'm an outspoken person or not. You know, I just think it's about being, you know, whenever I'm in a situation where I'm being asked questions, or like, let's say resiliency, to me, resiliency is just part of the human experience. You know, if there is one thing that we all have to deal with is resiliency, because there's one constant, and that is that everything changes. And so I need to be resilient with all situations, but more so when I'm in a room where I can shed light. And the way that I go about that is always and constantly reminding myself, what is the highest way that I can do this now? What is the highest? You know, it goes back to Michelle Obama's words, when they go low, we go high. You know, sometimes that's something that just rings true for me. What is the highest way that I can bring about what I need to do? And how do I show up in the highest way that I can?
So I don't know that I can speak specifically to the South Florida context. It has been, what, 7 years since I lived in Miami. But just kind of in general, I think increased access. When we have access to forms that don't require us to select Mr. or Miss, or select our gender, or identify specific things, or have a robust amount of gender options to represent variety. I think that's important. And I think one of the things we've seen a lot of, especially with younger queer folks, is the continued evolution of language to meet needs and address the access to their identity. I think as we continue to be able to be represented in spaces of power and the media and things appropriately, I think that helps take some of the barriers down. I don't necessarily know that we ever can get away from needing resiliency, because I think resiliency is always needed in the face of adversity, and adversity comes in many forms, not just related to identity. I got locked out of my house last week and I could not figure out how to open the lockbox to get my key. So like that was a piece of adversity not related to my identity, other than I guess my identity as a homeowner and somebody who forgot their key. But I think when we think about access and making sure that we're addressing, do we really need to know that piece of information? Is it important for what we're doing? Or if it is something that's important, can we have robust options for people to be able to choose from or to write their own in, and access to people that look like me or experience gender in similar ways that I do. So yeah, I think that it's not an answer that we can really accomplish in a week or a day or even a generation, but I think it's something that we can continue to actively work towards.
Thank you so much.
And I just kind of want to add on to that, which is I learned a lot of my kind of activism from going to the Creating Change conference 2 years. I went 2 years in a row through the school, and that was where I really learned how to formulate how I move about situations. And I think really just going in and listening to as many experiences that trans people have as possible. The first Creating Change I went into a meeting, a panel about gender inclusive restrooms and converting them in Chicago. And a lot of the discussion was about the roadblocks that they got from zoning boards and stuff like that. And then sure enough, a year and a half later, when we're working on that in Coral Gables, one of the first comments we get was on the zoning board. And so you kind of, a really good way is to go and listen to the struggles and those little successes that we do find. And when you find that struggle in your path, you have that first building block to move forward towards your own little victory as well. Thank you very much for the question, Brittany. Anyone else?
I wanted to add a really, interesting listening to the stories and people's experiences, and a lot of it echoed with me sort of the history of growing up in a small village as a lesbian. But what I wanted to say was that you never know what's going to be in our future to have advocacy for trans lives. And it just reminded me of things that impacted me growing up, like Princess Diana visiting children in Africa who had, who were HIV positive. That was like a turning point where a royal in England went to visit, was hugging them. That then sort of got sort of the idea that, we need to change our attitudes. And you never know what's in the future that's going to help change society to be a better place. And I'm always, inspired that there is great change ahead, and that there will be people who will help turn, people's opinion. And she turned people's opinion worldwide. And, from that, incredible sums of money were raised to try and, look at how we can, stop the infection of young children, particularly in Africa, with HIV, and what's come from that, from PrEP. And, I think I know it's taken 25 years, and I'm terrified by how long change takes. But I also want to share that, I'm always hopeful, and that there are people in our future, incredible people who will, and you quote to Michelle Obama, they go high, we go low, we go high. And I think that people are coming. And, the more we talk about it with each other and our families, and, we mention things over Thanksgiving, and certainly for me, the change in my family perspective, my neighbors, I go out and I actively engage. And I think if we keep doing that, the world is changing. Maybe not the pace I want to do, I'll be honest, but we've had a bit of a setback recently, maybe, but I think there's some good things ahead, and I just wanted to share that.
Thank you. If we don't have any other questions from the audience right now, I'm going to ask one of my own. So what advice would you have for younger trans activists or in queer folks to make to kind of ease the apprehension of getting involved in advocacy. I know advocacy involves a lot of putting yourself out there. So what's a really good kind of thing to tell younger folks in taking this leap?
I would say that you need to know when to step back. You need to know when to self-preserve. Um, I see a lot of new, I call them baby activists, not just in the queer community, but also just outside of the community because of the Black Lives Matter movement, everything that we're seeing in the media right now. And I always think like, if they continue to go at the rate they're going to burn out because you need to know when to step back, especially when you're, a youth. You really don't want to, sometimes we put the youth out there and we tend to victimize them instead of empowering them. So we need to help them find their voice. We need to teach them to know their limits and barriers, even when they're discussing with adults, because adults can be really big bullies sometimes. And it's just equipping them with the skills that they need to push forward and live healthy, happy lives.
I think also to understand there's power in telling your story. It took me a really long time to be comfortable with that because as many trans individuals, I was 19, I ran out of money, I fell into sex work, and being able to say that took me a really long time to be comfortable to say that. But now I look back and realize I'm able to show people that, because first and foremost, I have nothing against sex work. If that's something that you feel comfortable and you want to do, so be it. But what I do have a problem is where people think that's the only option. And I want people to know that there's more options. Don't feel like you have to. If you want to, of course, I support everybody as long as you're being safe and it's making you happy. But for a long time, I thought that was my only option as well. The people who were guiding me in the beginning of my transition told me, you're not going to be anything if you don't do this. You're not going to be able to get where you want if you don't do this. So I believe that. And then now, I've left that life 6+ years and I've been able to work normal jobs, you know what I mean? And be able to become who I am. And I just always want people to understand that there's power in telling your story. It's once again, putting that story and a face to it is what gets people to be like, oh, wow, okay, so that's what that means, or that's what that experience is like. And it's scary and it takes time. And I started telling my story like this, then like this, then like this. And eventually you get to a point where you can tell it. And then always remember that telling your story doesn't mean bearing your whole soul. You're allowed to keep things to yourself. You're allowed to keep experiences to yourself. So just tell enough that you're comfortable with as well.
I think too, you don't have to compare your involvement to somebody else. There are going to be people that are going to have a lot more energy. They're going to be a lot more outspoken. They're going to be like all gung ho and in it. And it's okay if that's not where you're at, or if you have to take baby steps towards it. There's no right way to get into advocacy. It's just a matter of taking the first step and what that first step is for you. It could be just talking to your best friend, or like a loved one, or it could be, making a meal for somebody who's out there marching and doing everything because you notice that they need to eat. So again, it doesn't don't compare yourself to anybody else, and don't let that discourage you from taking the step.
Right. And I think also part of that is like, don't get lost in the identity of being an activist. I mean, I feel like people just make that their title. It's not a title, it's a part of you. People really do get stuck in a cycle of like, at least in the trans community, it's like, I am a trans person. And like, that is at the forefront of like their existence. But we really need to take a step back and realize like, we live a whole life. We're not just that part. And I see that like a lot. And that was a part of my own narrative for a long time. And I'm starting to step out and be like, oh my God, like I have so many other like parts of my life that I never was able to experience because I was so caught up in trying to be seen for who I was and all this stuff. So definitely taking care of that part of you, and how Ayana says like that part of your soul, like you need to feed your soul,
I want to share something really quick. I'm going to try to make it as quick as possible. I'm 54 years old. And when I started Barry University, I was major in the closet, despite the fact that all my friends knew, family knew. I mean, obviously, it wasn't something I could hide. But I remember being chosen as one of the 10 speakers for a communications class based on an assignment that I had written and to present to school-wide. And nowhere in there did I have anything about being trans. But there was just this something that was the core of me that decided at that moment to speak up and open up and be open about who I am. And that whole Catholic university went like this, poof, and it completely embraced who I am. And it was just like such an amazing, like I couldn't have orchestrated that had I tried to do advocacy, write reports. I could have done it 1,000 ways, but it was that I seized that moment in being genuine, and I took that crowd and I brought them into me. I didn't become a part of them, I made them a part of me. And you know, it just opened up a whole new world for me where, you know, before I knew it, I was the vice president of the Pride group on campus that I called Pride in Action. And then before I knew it, I was the president. And then I got the Medal of Honor, the St. Catherine, which was the biggest medal of honor at that university. So, you know, all these things happened that were so much bigger than myself, than I ever imagined, all because I spoke up and I allowed to be me. I allowed myself to be me, to be vulnerable in front of others. And it had a great impact in my direction. And it has even driven my mission in life, you know, my mission to assist others in embracing who they are, in awakening to who they are, so that they can live life with passion, not with dread. So, you know, that's it.
Thank you. So we are running out of time here. So I'd like to just kind of open it up and ask if there were any final thoughts or final kind of feelings you'd like to share.
Yes. Love yourself. Assess how much you love yourself. You know, even if it takes you to drive down on a piece of paper 1 through 10, how much do I love myself? Am I below a 5 or am I above a 5? You know, if I'm not at a 10, then there's work to be done. If you're a below 5, then I suggest reaching out for help, because there is a world of help and support out there. And there is so much love and so many people who are willing to give you love. So, you know, assess that, live from that love, because it's who you are. It's what you were created to be, is to be that presence of love in life.
If your glass is empty, you can't help anybody else. So always look inward, just like Ayana said, look inward first and realize maybe I want to do advocacy, but maybe I should work on myself first. Because at the end of the day, you have to be comfortable with yourself. You have to love yourself. You have to be good so that you can help other people. So just like she said, reach out for help. There's such a stigma around mental health counseling, and there's nothing wrong with it. I've been in counseling for 6 years and it has changed my life, and I have no problem telling anybody that. And I know, especially in communities of color, our families tell us, don't tell family business to nobody, keep your stuff to yourself. But that's that toxic cycle that we've all been in for generations. So be that one to break it. Be the one to say, I want to go to a counselor. I want to talk to somebody. There's nothing wrong with that at all, I promise.
I'm just going to kind of reiterate a little bit of what I said. Like it's all right to not be the person at the front. If you're the person, if you just want to be involved, like taking care of others, every little bit helps move us forward. And even if it doesn't seem like a big deal, that conversation you had over the dinner table shifted, if it shifted somebody's view, then that's a step forward for the whole community and a step forward for yourself. So it's okay to take small steps. It's okay to take giant leaps. The important thing is that you just keep moving.
Awesome. Well, I just want to put one last final thought from myself before I pass it over to Dr. Vega to wrap us up here. I'd just like to say thank you to all of the people who kind of paved a way through their activism. Those of you who know me know that I am hoping to get into something that doesn't really have much to do with being trans. And part of the reason I can do that today is that there were people who came before me who made it okay to kind of exist as trans in society. And so that has really helped me move on to what I'm able to do. And so I really appreciate that for everyone who's made that their journey in life. Dr. Vega?
This was so inspiring. Thank you all so much. All of you are amazing and true lights and leaders in your own right. So I love you all very much. Thank you so much for being here today, taking time to answer some difficult questions. And I know we've taped the session, so hopefully we can continue to spread the words of wisdom and the inspiring words you've shared with other folks in our community. Thank you again. Again, please become involved. I know one of the questions we didn't really get to, but how do we work collaboratively? And I think, it's important for us to know that we all need to be here for each other and support each other through our challenges and our struggles. Those of you that know me know that collaboration is kind of my middle name, and it's important for us to work together to help lift each other up. So thank you all again. If you happen to be on the campus, remember we have our memorial downstairs outside the Witten University Center. Hopefully we'll see some of you there. Also, there are many amazing events happening in our community today, tonight. Please take advantage of those. Get involved and make a difference. So thank you all. Hope you've enjoyed our session today, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you all so much for being here. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone.